You know the thing about a shark? He's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you. And those black eyes roll over white, and then... Oh, then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and in spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces.
We all know by now that Jaws is a classic, one of the best horror films ever made, and the event that catapulted Steven Spielberg to the top of the Hollywood pyramid. But why does Jaws work so well? There are many different factors. The timeless storytelling trope of man conquering his greatest fear.
We know all about you, Chief. You don't go in the water at all, do you?
Some bad hat, Harry.
The brilliant casting and performances.
Give me your hands. Dogfish. You got a $5,000 net. You got $2,000 worth of fishing, and along comes Mr. Whitey. By the time he's finished with that net, looks like a kiddie scissor class has cut it up for a paper doll. You got city hands, Mr. Hooper. Been counting money all your life.
All right. Hey, I don't need this. I don't need this working class hero crap.
You're not going to do this aboard the ship, are you, Mr. Quinn?
The very deliberate choice to show as little of the shark as possible, allowing the minds of the audience to imagine much worse than the filmmakers could ever show. And of course there is John Williams' brilliant, iconic score.
That's a 20-footer. 25.
But today I want to examine something not so obvious about Jaws' cinematic potency, and that's Spielberg's incredibly inventive camera blocking and staging techniques. For those who don't know what camera blocking is, it's the interplay between the camera and the actors in the scene, where they are in relation to each other moment to moment as the scene progresses. One of Spielberg's hallmark techniques is the oneer, one long extended take where he uses many different camera positions without any cuts, using each camera position to advance story, character, and theme. In other words, he edits the scene in camera, on the set. This is a high-wire act of filmmaking because you can't change or fix anything in post-production with editing. Pretty much what you've shot is what you end up with, for better or worse. Very few filmmakers have the skill or courage to attempt this. There's one such scene in Jaws that's my favorite and a perfect example of this technique. During the scene where Brody and Hooper are trying to convince the mayor to close the beaches because of the shark attacks. A good director uses the camera not only to show the events of the story, but to develop the characters, advance the plot, and continually hammer home the theme. In terms of character, Chief Brody, the moral rock of the movie, dealing with not only his responsibility for the safety of Amity citizens, but his fear of the ocean. Similarly, Hooper is also looking out for the people of Amity, but he is much more desperate to prove his worthiness as a shark expert, and someone who can deal with the problem. Mayor Vaughn is a proud man who stubbornly refuses to acknowledge the shark problem in order to preserve the idea of his town as a peaceful vacation getaway, and he's protecting his own image. This scene is made up of one long take, that is 2 minutes and 37 seconds, and involves 20 different camera setups or shots. So let's dive in and examine why this is such a brilliant scene. So the first shot starts in a long shot, with the three men walking toward the camera. Also notice the backdrop of the ocean in the distance, visually representing what this conversation is all about. It's not just telling but showing, which is good filmmaking 101.
And any shark expert in the world will tell you it's a killer, it's a man-eater. Look, the situation is that apparently a great white shark has staked a claim in the waters off Amity Island.
And they stop right in front of the camera in a medium shot, with the mayor placed in between Brody and Hooper. This shot accomplishes a couple of different things. Brody and Hooper are in profile, while the mayor faces us, visually signifying that the mayor is in a position of power, while the other two men are weaker and more compromised, since we only see half of them. It also implies the squeeze the mayor is feeling over the recent events. Essentially, he's trapped in between a rock, Brody, and a hard place, Hooper.
And he is going to continue to feed here as long as there is food in the water.
And there's no limit to what he's going to do. I mean, we've already had 3 incidents. 2 people killed inside of a week, and it's going to happen again. It happened before. The Jersey Beach.
1916, there were 5
people chewed up in the surf.
In 1 week.
Tell them about the swimmers.
A shark is attracted to the exact kind of splashing and activity that occurs whenever human beings go in swimming. You cannot avoid it.
If you open the beaches on the 4th of July, it's like ringing the dinner bell, for Christ's
Look,
sake.
Mr. Vaughn.
Now here Hooper switches positions, as he's about to talk about the tooth that he pulled from the boat. He steps camera right of the mayor and alongside Brody, being placed in an over-the-shoulder shot, with the mayor and Brody off to the side. This over-the-shoulder visually signifies Hooper's growing impatience and desire to make his point crystal clear, as the mayor is now forced to look at him directly. It also creates another shot.
Mr. Vaughn, I pulled a tooth the size of a shot glass out of the wrecked hull of the boat out there, and it was the tooth of a great white.
It was Ben Gardner's boat. It was all chewed up. I helped tow it in. You should have seen him.
Where is that tooth? Did you see it, Brody?
No, I didn't see it. He dropped it.
I had an accident.
Now this is key, because the mayor wants to see the tooth, and Hooper knows he can't provide it, making it harder for him to prove himself. It's a moment of wounded pride, and this is perfectly signified visually, as Hooper, head down in a moment of defeat, moves back to his original weakened position of profile.
And what did you say the name of this shark is?
It's a Carcharodon carcharius. It's a great white.
But you don't have the tooth. Look, we depend on the summer people here for our very lives.
You are not going...
Now notice Brody walking away as the mayor digs in his heels, which may seem insignificant, but it's totally representative of his character. Brody is a reluctant hero, someone whose will and determination is constantly tested, and his arc is rising to that challenge, but this doesn't really happen until later. For now, he has a tendency to avoid his problems, the water, the shark, and in this scene, the stubborn mayor. It also creates 2 shots in one, a long shot with Brody in the distance, and a 2-shot with Hooper and the mayor. And this 2-shot reinforces Hooper as the stubborn bulldog who won't let go, desperate to prove himself.
If you close those beaches, we're finished.
We're not only going to have to close the beach, we're going to have to hire somebody to kill the shark.
Brody comes back to join the fight, which any good hero does, creating another 3-shot, but this time with some visual variety as the 3 men are now staggered on different planes. Spielberg is continuing the same pattern, but adding visual variety so that the scene remains interesting to watch. It's repetitive, but never boring.
I mean, we're going to have to tell the Coast Guard.
Mr. Vaughn,
We're going to
you
have to get
contact the
repellent.
shark
We're going to have to put
research
extra
panel.
deputies on because
You
every
have to
nut in
ring
the
this
world is going to
entire
come in here.
harbor.
We can't
I don't
spend
think
money
either
on
one of you
get
are familiar with our problem.
Getting fed up and wanting to escape the tirade, Mayor Vaughn begins walking away and the men follow, creating a tracking shot.
I think that I am familiar with the
And once again, Hooper moves and positions himself in front of the mayor, asserting himself with his by now familiar bullish attitude.
fact that you are going to ignore this particular problem until it swims up and bites you on the ass.
Also notice how we're beginning to see tourists in the background, gathering around the billboard, which will become visible in a second. This is another brilliant stroke by Spielberg, as a way of visually representing what's happening in the conversation. They are talking about the safety of the tourists and citizens of Amity after all, so why not show them? This also continues to keep the shot visually interesting by adding variety. And there he goes again. Brody storms off over the reluctant hero, but this time he actually leaves the frame entirely. This is powerful because it is a much stronger emphasis on his attitude of frustration and reluctance, and makes Hooper's bullish attitude all the more obvious, as he's the only one left in the frame with Mayor Vaughn.
Two ways to deal with this problem. You're either going to kill this animal, or you're going to cut off its food supply.
Larry, we have to close the beaches.
Brody, sick vandalism.
The camera comes to a stop to showcase the billboard in the background, but it also does something else incredibly interesting. The camera actually stops as it moves to include Brody back in the scene. It's as if the camera is a moral authority, forcing Brody to face his problems, which is the mayor's stubbornness, and, as the billboard has revealed, the ocean and the shark, two things he will be forced to face later in the movie, and the girl, who represents the victims of the shark. And notice the words out of her mouth being help, another visual reminder of Brody's responsibility to the citizens and tourists. This also creates another 3-shot, but this time with more visual variety. And maybe going a little too deep here, notice how Brody is physically placed over the words, welcomes you, as if to say, the ocean, the shark, the girl, welcomes you to face your fears.
That is a deliberate mutilation of a public service message. Now,
And this time it's Hooper who steps away from the conversation for the first time, implying that he's had it and doesn't want to deal with the mayor anymore, putting him in a long shot. But notice now how he's stepping away from the men but toward the shark in the background. It's a visual nod to his fascination with sharks and also his unwavering desire to kill it. Also notice how Mayor Vaughn and Brody are on opposite sides of the frame here, with the shark and the girl on the billboard between them, representing the problem that is keeping the mayor-in-chief apart. The scene is just filled with incredible visual flourishes like this that aren't just pretty to look at, they advance character and story.
want those little paint-happy bastards caught and hung up by their Buster Browns.
That's it. Goodbye. I'm not going to waste my time arguing with a man who's lining up to be a hot lunch.
And Hooper comes back to make another shot, a 3-shot.
I'm going to see you later.
Now look at how striking this moment is. The mayor moves closer to the camera in a medium shot, becoming very large in the frame, with the camera looking up at him, suggesting not only his important stature in the community, but he's also turned himself away from the shark and the girl on the billboard, visually implying that he no longer cares, while Brody has moved away from the camera in order to convince Hooper to keep at it. Another ebb and flow through Brody's character arc of the reluctant hero rising to the challenge. And notice how small they are in the frame compared to how large Mayor Vaughn is, suggesting his dominance over them. This is very, very smart camera work by Spielberg, continuing to showcase his absolute mastery over his craft, even this early in his career. Visually, this is a turning point in the scene. The men have never seemed so further away from each other, both physically and morally. This striking visual dynamic style was quite common in Orson Welles' work, another brilliant filmmaker who used the film frame to its maximum potential to develop character and theme. Spielberg is one of the few remaining filmmakers to continue this classical style of filmmaking that relies less on cutting and more on maximizing the camera's ability to produce images that tell a story. The men come back to meet the mayor, creating another shot, a 3-shot.
Mr. Vaughn, what we are dealing with here is a perfect engine, an eating machine. It's really a miracle of evolution. All this machine does is swim and eat and make little sharks, and that's all. Now, why don't you take a long, close look at this sign?
And once again, Hooper moves back toward the billboard and the shark, creating another shot, a long shot, while the other two men stay in a 2-shot.
Those proportions are correct.
Love to prove that, wouldn't you? Get your name into the National Geographic.
Now look at all the negative space on the left side of the frame as the mayor leaves for the first time, completely leaving the frame, implying that the matter is closed and he isn't going to cooperate, putting Brody and Hooper in an awkward 2-shot, but still interesting since they are positioned against the billboard and the shark fin, creating a sense of inevitability of having to go at it alone. And next you'll see Brody leave the frame, leaving Hooper alone as the camera moves with him, creating the final shot of the oneer, a long shot. And that's it. One long continuous take with 20 separate shots, comprising 2 minutes and 37 seconds. This kind of filmmaking is virtually unheard of today, but it's one of the many reasons Jaws is a timeless classic. Now, go and watch this scene again with all this new information in mind. It really gives one a greater appreciation of Spielberg's talent. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.